You think you know the greatest maritime mystery? You don't. Because to truly understand the horror of the Mary Celeste, you have to forget the ghost stories for a moment and remember what she actually was: a perfectly ordinary, well-built ship. Her story starts in Nova Scotia back in 1861. They first called her the Amazon, a sturdy merchant brigantine built for predictable trade, not legend. For years, she did exactly what she was supposed to do: routine voyages, reliable work. But here's the thing about the sea: it breeds superstition. When she was later registered in America and christened the Mary Celeste, the local dock workers were already whispering. They claimed she was cursed, that she carried a dark energy from her very first launch. They even muttered about a strange ancient amulet that the new skipper kept hidden. That new skipper was Captain Benjamin Briggs, and if you needed a man to defy a curse, it was him. Briggs was legendary for his meticulous command style. He was sharp, disciplined, and intimately close with his crew, a small, loyal family at sea. His journals were precise. His ship was flawless. This wasn't some sloppy, sinking wreck waiting to happen. This was a paragon of maritime efficiency. And so, on a dense, foggy morning in November of 1872, the Mary Celeste slipped out of the port of New York. She was fully provisioned, carrying 1,700 barrels of crude alcohol, bound for Genoa, Italy. Briggs was on deck, his wife and 2-year-old daughter were aboard, and every sail was perfectly rigged for the Atlantic crossing. She was the definition of ready. She was flawless, which only makes what happened next utterly impossible. Because what happens when a perfect ship, run by a perfect captain, simply vanishes? November 7th, 1872. Imagine the scene. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their little 2-year-old daughter, the whole family was together for the voyage, plus 7 experienced crewmen, 10 souls in total, setting off on what should have been a 6-week transatlantic slug to Genoa, Italy. Their hold was packed with 1,701 barrels of raw industrial alcohol, a heavy, volatile shipment. Now, this cargo was essential to their mission, but even back on the docks, the workers had complained, not just about the weight, but about the smell, a thick, chemical, almost unsavory stench that hung in the air, a whisper of something explosive waiting to happen. But on board, everything was business as usual. Briggs was a fastidious logger. His final known entries detail nothing remarkable: routine sail trim, decent weather, ship holding course. The reports from other ships that left around the same time indicated typical early winter conditions: no major storms, just predictable sailing. I often think about the last moments of normalcy, that quiet supper, perhaps a week out, shared under a blanket of cold Atlantic starlight. Briggs reading a passage from his Bible, Sarah rocking the baby, the crew joking quietly over hard biscuits and salted meat. The rhythm of the sea beneath them was steady, familiar, safe. There were no alarms, there were no warnings. There were only clear skies, a steady wind, and the knowledge that a few weeks more would bring them to Italy. So how do you explain this? Less than a month after that routine departure, a completely different ship found the Mary Celeste, and what they found made absolutely zero sense. We have to talk about the Dei Gratia, the ship that discovered the unthinkable. It was December 4th, 1872. 3 weeks out of New York, a ship called the Dei Gratia was cutting through the Atlantic, about 400 miles east of the Azores. Her captain, David Morehouse, was an old hand. Nothing surprised him much, until he spotted something on the horizon that made his blood run cold. It was the Mary Celeste, drifting. Morehouse knew the ship. In a bizarre twist of fate, he had dined with Captain Briggs just days before they both left New York. But what he saw now defied all logic. The brigantine was under partial sail, moving sluggishly, but clearly seaworthy. Yet, when they hailed her, nothing. Silence. Morehouse sent a boarding party over. And what they found wasn't a derelict, but a ghost. The men stepped onto the deck, sails flapping loosely, and the silence hit them first. A deep, unnatural vacuum where the noise of 10 men should have been. The crew quarters were disheveled, but the personal belongings, Briggs's Bible, Sarah's sewing kit, the child's toys, were still there, untouched. Provisions for 6 months were stacked in the galley. It was as if everyone had stopped mid-sentence and simply left. But there were signs of panic. The ship's single lifeboat was missing. One of the pumps was dismantled on the deck, suggesting the crew might have been trying to repair something rapidly. And when they checked the main hold, they found something terrifying. Nearly 4 feet of seawater sloshing around. What sealed the mystery was the captain's log. The last entry was dated November 25th, 10 days before their discovery, placing the Mary Celeste about 100 miles west of where she was found. 10 days of travel, 10 days of life, erased without a word. The men of the De Gratia were veterans, but they were now steeped in superstition. They were standing on a ship that was perfectly fine, except for one critical detail. Where were the 10 souls who called it home? And what horror had compelled a meticulous captain to abandon his ship, his livelihood, and his family 10 days before that cold, silent discovery? When the De Gratia crew examined the Mary Celeste, one document held the key to her final days, the logbook, but it was a lock without a keyhole. The last entry was dated November 25th, a clear record that placed the brigantine just 6 miles northeast of the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. That's it. No distress, no panic, no weather warning, just a location and a date, 10 days before her discovery. The fact that the log was intact, sitting right next to the undisturbed ship registry papers, confirms one thing. This was not a chaotic, last-minute flight. But look deeper. The vital navigational instruments, the sextant, the chronometer, they were gone. They were missing from their customary storage place. Why? A captain as meticulous as Briggs wouldn't abandon his ship without the log, but he would certainly take his most valuable tools if he intended to navigate a lifeboat to shore. This suggests an orderly but extremely hurried evacuation. I found a chilling quote, allegedly from Briggs to a fellow captain, expressing unease about the sheer volatility of his cargo. The industrial alcohol wasn't just heavy, it was a ticking time bomb, breathing off noxious fumes. Could that have played a role? Here is the puzzle. The log says they were fine on November 25th, right next to land. They had a seaworthy ship, they had plenty of food, but they took the lifeboat and they took the instruments, which means they planned to return to civilization. If they were near land, why abandon a sturdy ship for a small lifeboat? And if they were running from something, why was every other object of value, money, jewelry, the cargo itself, left completely untouched? The logbook ends, and the real terror begins, because the simplest answers here are the ones that are most terrifying. They chose to leave. But what could possibly make a man choose a tiny boat on the open ocean over his perfect ship? The moment the Mary Celeste was towed into Gibraltar, the world erupted with theories, because when 10 people vanish from a perfectly good ship, the human mind struggles to cope with the void. First, the easy answers. Piracy? No. The cargo was worth a fortune and it was untouched. Mutiny? Impossible. The crew had worked together for years, and Briggs was a beloved captain. Besides, why would mutineers take a tiny lifeboat and leave all the riches behind? These theories collapsed instantly. So, the sea offered harsher, more sudden possibilities. Could it have been a rogue wave? A massive, unpredictable wall of water that briefly swamped the deck, convincing Briggs the ship was doomed, forcing them into the lifeboat? Highly possible. But then why take the time to grab the sextant? Or consider the cargo, 1,700 barrels of raw industrial alcohol. The hold was found with 4 feet of water. It wasn't just seawater, it was also the alcohol, potentially leaking and vaporizing. Imagine the fumes trapped below deck. The smallest spark, the wrong temperature, could create a horrifying, deafening explosion that rips the deck apart. Briggs might have ordered an immediate evacuation, believing the ship was about to detonate, planning to wait out the danger safely tethered nearby in the lifeboat. But that leads to the terrible twist. If they were tied to the Mary Celeste, perhaps a sudden squall, a shift in the wind, or a faulty knot severed the tow line. The crew would have been left adrift in the small boat, watching their perfectly safe brigantine sail slowly away from them. Of course, back then, the public preferred the fantastical. They talked of the kraken or great sea serpents. They revived the ancient maritime superstitions, vengeful spirits of the deep finally claiming the Mary Celeste, just as the dockworkers had predicted years earlier. The truth is, all we have are hypotheses, but every single one hinges on one common element, a sudden, terrifying moment of panic. A moment that was so compelling, it outweighed the safety of a sturdy ship. And that's why the story didn't end in 1872. It ended in a courtroom where the true scandal began. The real key to the mystery wasn't on the deck. It was deep inside the ship, the cargo hold. Remember those 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol? When investigators finally examined the Mary Celeste in Gibraltar, they found 9 of those barrels were completely empty. Not smashed, just empty. Combined with the 4 feet of water sloshing in the hold and the dismantled pump found on deck, the story starts to shift. The crew clearly faced a major issue with flooding, but was it just water? Leaking alcohol doesn't just dilute, it vaporizes. Imagine those fumes rising through the decking, a thick, invisible cloud of highly explosive gas filling the close quarters. Even the first mate's notes, if we could read them, might have described a persistent, faint chemical smell that made them nervous. It's easy to dismiss this as simply a leak, but consider the temperature difference between the hold and the open sea. A sudden pressure change, a small electrical spark from friction, anything could have triggered a flash fire or a low-grade internal explosion that felt catastrophic in the moment. My theory, Briggs likely believed the hold was compromised and that an explosion was imminent. He wouldn't risk his wife and child. He ordered the lifeboat deployed and the crew to take the navigational tools, intending to keep a short rope tethered to the Mary Celeste. They would simply wait for the vapors to clear or for the perceived danger to pass, then reboard the ship and continue the voyage. This explains the order, the missing boat, and the intact valuables. They never intended to leave her permanently. But what if, during that frantic lowering of the lifeboat, the weather turned? What if that carefully planned temporary departure became a permanent separation in a matter of seconds? The Mary Celeste sails on. The lifeboat is left behind, carrying 10 souls into the dark. And the trial? That's where the story of the Mary Celeste gets truly cynical. Because the discovery was a miracle for Captain Morehouse, but it became a nightmare of greed and suspicion. The most agonizing part of the Mary Celeste story isn't the ghost ship itself, it's the 10 people who disappeared. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter, and 7 men. They vanished completely. No wreckage, no bodies, and not a single piece of evidence about their fate was ever found. The official search was brief and utterly fruitless. Naval ships scoured the area around the Azores, where the last log entry placed them, and along the route where the Mary Celeste was found. Nothing. The ocean had simply swallowed them whole. Relatives wrote desperate, heartbroken letters. They questioned the initial assessment, unwilling to accept that an organized, devout man like Briggs would sacrifice his family for nothing. They suspected foul play, demanded answers. Imagine the official inquiry, A room full of seasoned naval officers staring at the evidence. A perfectly good ship, fully stocked, sailing quietly on its own. They determined the ship was abandoned in haste, but they couldn't explain why. The sheer inexplicability led to low salvage awards for the De Gratia crew, as the court hinted at suspicion and mismanagement, unable to process the clean simplicity of the mystery. If they abandoned ship due to the alcohol fumes, they drowned. If they were hit by a rogue wave, they drowned. If they were murdered, their bodies were dumped. Every single path leads to the same devastating silence. The ocean simply kept its secrets. But the silence only fueled the narrative, didn't it? Because in the years that followed, people couldn't resist filling that void with fiction. And one man in particular took the story of the Mary Celeste and made it immortal, but horribly wrong. Decades passed, but the Mary Celeste refused to sink into history. Every new generation of maritime investigators tried to solve the riddle using new technology and forensic science. In the 20th century, marine detectives tried analyzing preserved wood samples for signs of heat stress, looking for evidence of that flash explosion theory. They pored over historical shipping logs, cross-referencing every single vessel that might have been near the Mary Celeste on November 25, 1872. Modern scientists have offered startling explanations. What about a seaquake? A sudden, sharp underwater tremor that could have caused the entire crew to lose their balance, sending them scrambling for the lifeboat out of sheer primal fear, believing the hull was shattering beneath them. Or let's revisit the alcohol vapors. Experts calculated that a sudden spike in atmospheric pressure, like a severe but localized squall, combined with the heat of the cargo, could have created a massive, though completely non-damaging, gaseous pressure wave. A sudden whoosh of air and fire that would have convinced Captain Briggs the ship was minutes from being blown to pieces. The lack of fire damage supports this. It was a scare, not a disaster. Even after 150 years, no definitive answer has emerged. But the continuing investigation proves one crucial thing. The official narrative that this was simply a rogue wave or some mundane accident never satisfied the people seeking truth. Because if the official story was so compelling, why did a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle step in and turn the Mary Celeste into the ultimate global sensation? He didn't solve the mystery, he perfected it. The Mary Celeste had simply been a ship that sank, we wouldn't be talking about her today. Her immortality was secured not by the sea, but by storytellers. The most important voice belonged to Arthur Conan Doyle. In 1884, the same man who created Sherlock Holmes wrote a fictionalized account of the mystery called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. Doyle didn't care about the facts, he cared about the drama. He introduced elements of voodoo and violent revenge. His story was a global hit, cementing the image of the Mary Celeste as the definitive ghost ship, a floating coffin left by inexplicable supernatural forces. Doyle's narrative was so powerful that it overshadowed the actual boring facts of Captain Briggs and his dismantled pump. The story was transformed into countless films, some depicting vengeful spirits, others showing elaborate mutinies and gruesome murders. It became a piece of global folklore, the ultimate campfire tale. Even today, every time a modern film features a derelict vessel, perfectly intact but completely deserted, it's paying homage to the Mary Celeste. Sailors, even today, gather in misty ports and whisper about the ship's curse. They don't talk about industrial alcohol or missing sextants. They talk about the cold silence, the food still warm on the table, and the 10 souls who simply walked off the face of the earth. She became a symbol of the ocean's terrifying power, the ability to erase life instantly, cleanly, and without leaving a single answer behind. But now we have to talk about the final miserable voyage of the ship itself. Because while the mystery became immortal, the Mary Celeste was destined for a much more practical and tragic end. The story of the Mary Celeste is less about the ship and more about the human need for answers. What truly haunts us isn't the sight of the deserted deck. It's the picture of Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter. Did they drown in the dark? Did they make it to shore only to starve? We simply don't know. And that void, that silent ending, is what makes the tale eternal. The mystery forces us to confront the ocean's true power. It doesn't need a sea monster or a curse to claim its victims. It just needs a sudden squall, a broken rope, or a moment of misplaced fear triggered by a volatile cargo. The ocean is the ultimate curator of secrets. As for the ship itself, she never found peace. The Mary Celeste was salvaged, sold, and passed through various owners, always dogged by the cursed reputation that clung to her. Her life ended not in a heroic storm or a glorious battle, but in a final intentional wreck off Haiti in 1885, in a doomed attempt at insurance fraud. A shameful, cynical end for a ship that had become a legend. But the real legacy isn't the wreck. The Mary Celeste reminds us that the best stories are the ones that never resolve. They force you to look at the silent, empty horizon and wonder. It invites you to step onto that perfectly sound, well-provisioned ship and ask yourself, if you were Captain Briggs, what would be the single thing that would force you to abandon your family, your ship, and your life without leaving a single trace? Thank you for exploring this eternal mystery with me. If this deep dive into the unknown captured your imagination, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, what do you think happened to Captain Briggs and his crew? And don't forget to subscribe. We have so many more secrets to uncover.